Turning to Europe, the area's finance ministers meeting in Copenhagen have agreed to increase the region's bailout fund to help contain the debt crisis. Ministers put the total size of the so-called firewall at just over $1 trillion. That money also includes bailouts already given to Greece, Ireland and Portugal. But will the increased aid lead to structural reforms? Thomas Miller served as U.S. ambassador to Greece from 2001 to 2004. He's currently president and CEO of the International Executive Service Corps, and he joins us from our Washington bureau. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to Bottom Line. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mark.
Sir, is $1.1 trillion enough to prevent a future sovereign debt crisis in Europe?
Well, some people think that 1.1 trillion euros is the number that's needed. $1.1 trillion is only about 720 billion euros. And I think that's a very important question. It's an extremely important psychological question. Some people don't think that is enough.
Sir, is the size of the firewall then enough to convince other major non-European economies to donate new resources to the International Monetary Fund?
Again, I think that's a very hard one to answer, particularly as the world economy is still in a recovery phase from the recession. And so my sense is that it's going to be a very, very close call. And I think some of this, Mark, will be a function of what they see in terms of structural reforms in the countries that are being assisted, and particularly focus on Greece, where they've got an election next month.
Sir, speaking of that Greek election, you and I have spoken in the past about some of the situation in Greece. It seemed that was the lead domino a couple of years ago when all of this sovereign debt crisis talk first came to pass. Talk to me about the elections in Greece and the importance of that, given that now you have, as opposed to politicians, technocrats who did the best that they could, according to some in Greece, to try to contain that sovereign debt crisis there.
Right. Well, first of all, I said the election's next month. They haven't fixed a date. It could be either the last Sunday in April or the first two Sundays, one of the first two Sundays in May. And so that's still out there. What we're seeing from the polls is very curious and somewhat troubling, and that is there have always been two large parties in Greece. And right now, from the polling data, these two large, one of the parties, the one that's in the opposition now, most likely will win the election, will get a plurality. The other party that has been in power in the past, by the polling data, is going to do not too well. What we're seeing, and this is something new, Mark, is that a lot of the fringe parties on both the left and the right are polling extremely high. And this could be very destabilizing for Greece, because the thought was, the scuttlebutt is that these two large parties that have basically alternated having power in Greece over many decades would form a coalition government. But if they don't get enough votes to form a coalition government, right, this could be troubling.
Mr. Ambassador, some leaders at that Copenhagen meeting, they wanted to go beyond the $1.1 trillion that was committed today, but there are reports that German officials rejected that idea. Germany's the strongest economy in the Eurozone and the biggest contributor to the bailout funds. In your opinion, is Germany at the end of its financial rope as far as further allocation of resources to weaker nations is concerned?
Mark, I've been on your program off and on for the last 2 years, and you've asked me the same question. Is this it? Is this the end of the rope? And the answer is never. You know, Chancellor Merkel you're absolutely right, was very resistant to going up to $1 trillion euros. And her argument made a lot of sense. You know, if you have this large, extremely large firewall, what incentive are these countries going to have to undertake the painful structural reforms that they have to take? You know, the counter argument, which is equally persuasive, is that if you don't have a large enough firewall, then you could have the panic that has, that we went through and others went through in 2008.
Mr. Ambassador, we have about a minute left. You talk about the size of that firewall. Is there concern that there might not be enough in that fund to aid, say, the countries of Spain and Italy? Because we've been hearing concerns about them, and that's been roiling the global markets this week.
Well, that's the big question. There's clearly enough for Greece and Portugal, and then a lot left over. But the question, and really the answer to your question, Mark, is a function of what is the situation in Spain and Italy. Everyone's really focusing on the interest rates for 10-year bonds that both Spain and Italy are paying, and they spiked. And I remember in Italy a while back over 7%. They've come down. In Spain, they've come down. But you know, this is a moving target, and if they spike again, the question about is the firewall big enough is a very, very valid question.
Thomas Miller, he served as U.S. Ambassador to Greece from 2001 to 2004, now President and CEO of the International Executive Service Corps. Mr. Ambassador, it's always great to get your perspective. Thank you so much.